Hey there, time for dinner. We're on 2 Samuel 17. And Ahithophel said to Absalom, "Please let me choose 12,000 men, and let me arise and pursue David tonight, and come upon him while he is weary and weak. And I shall make him afraid, and all the people who are with him shall flee, and I shall strike the sovereign alone, and bring back all the people to you. When all return, except the man whom you seek, all the people should be at peace." And the saying pleased Absalom and all the elders of Israel. But Absalom said, "Now call Hushai the Archite also, and let us hear what he says too." And Hushai came to Absalom, and Absalom spoke to him, saying, "Ahithophel has spoken according to this word. Should we do as he says? If not, speak up." And Hushai said to Absalom, "The advice that Ahithophel has given is not good at this time." And Hushai said, "You know your father and his men, that they are mighty men, and they are as bitter in being as a bear robbed of her cubs in the field. And your father is a man of battle, and would not spend the night with the people. See now, he is hidden in some pit or in some place. And it shall be, when some of them fall at the first, that whoever hears it shall say, 'There has been a slaughter among the people who are following Absalom.' And even he who is brave, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, would utterly melt. For all Israel knows that your father is a mighty man, and those who are with him are brave men. But I advise, let all Israel without fail be gathered to you, from Dan to Beersheba, as numerous as the sand by the sea, and that you yourself go to battle. And we shall come upon him in some place where he is found, and fall on him as the dew falls on the ground. And there shall be left of him, and of all the men with him, not even one. And if he withdraws into a city, then all Israel shall bring ropes to that city, and we shall put it into the wadi, until there is not one small stone found there." Absalom and all the men of Israel then said, "The advice of Hushai the Archite is better than the advice of Ahithophel. For Jehovah has ordained to nullify the good advice of Ahithophel, for the sake of Jehovah bringing evil upon Absalom." Hushai then said to Zadok and to Eleazar the priest, "Ahithophel has advised Absalom and the elders of Israel such and such, but I have advised so and so. And now send hastily and inform David, saying, 'Do not spend this night in the desert plains of the wilderness, but pass over without fail, lest the sovereign and all the people with him be swallowed up.'" And Jonathan and Ahimaaz were stationed at En Regol, and a female servant would come and inform them. And they would go and inform sovereign David, for they could not be seen entering the city. But a youth saw them and informed Absalom. So the two of them went away at once and came to a man's house in Bahurim, who had a well in his courtyard, and they went down into it. And the woman took and spread a covering over the well's mouth, and spread ground grain on it, so the matter was not known. And the servants of Absalom came to the woman at the house and said, "Where are Ahimaaz and Jonathan?" And the woman said to them, "They have passed over the stream of water." And they looked and did not find them, and returned to Jerusalem. And it came to be, after they had left, that they came up out of the well, and went and informed sovereign David, and said to David, "Arise and pass over the water quickly, for thus Ahithophel has advised against you." And David and all the people who were with him rose up and passed over the Jordan. And by morning light, not even one remained who had not gone over the Jordan. And Ahithophel saw that his advice was not followed, so he saddled his donkey and rose up and went home to his house, to his city. Then he gave command to his house and hanged himself and died. And he was buried in his father's burial site. And David came to Mahanaim, and Absalom passed over the Jordan, he and all the men of Israel with him. And Absalom appointed Amasa over the army instead of Joab. Now Amasa was the son of a man whose name was Yithra, a Yisraeli, who had gone in to Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, sister of Zeruiah, Joab's mother. And Yisrael and Absalom encamped in the land of Gilead. And it came to be, when David had come to Mahanaim, that Shobai, son of Nahash, from Rabbah of the children of Ammon, Machir, son of Amiel, from Lo-debar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite, from Rogelim, brought beds and basins and earthen vessels, and wheat and barley and flour and roasted grain and beans, and lentils and parched vegetables, and honey and curds, and sheep and cheese of the herd, for David and the people who were with him to eat. For they said, "The people are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness." And David mustered the people who were with him, and set commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds over them. And David sent out 1/3 of the people under the hand of Joab, and 1/3 under the hand of Abishai, son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and 1/3 under the hand of Ittai the Gittite. "I shall certainly go out with you too." But the people answered, "Do not go out, for if we flee away, they would not set heart upon us. Even if half of us die, they would not set heart upon us. For now 10,000 are like us. Therefore it is better for you to support us from the city." And the sovereign said to them, "That which is good in your eyes I do." And the sovereign stood beside the gate, and all the people went out by hundreds and by thousands. And the sovereign ordered Joab and Abishai and Ittai, saying, "Be gentle with the young man Absalom for my sake." And all the people heard when the sovereign gave all the commanders orders concerning Absalom. So the people went out into the field to meet Israel, and the battle was in the forest of Ephraim. And the people of Israel were smitten there before the servants of David, and the slaughter there that day was great, 20,000. And the battle there was scattered over the face of all the land, and the forest devoured more people that day than the sword devoured. And when Absalom met the servants of David, Absalom was riding on a mule, and the mule went under the thick branches of a great terebinth tree, and his head caught hold in the terebinth, and he was suspended between the heavens and earth, while the mule which was under him passed on. And a certain man saw it and informed Joab and said, "Look, I saw Absalom hanging in a terebinth tree." And Joab said to the man who informed him, "Now look, you saw, and why did you not strike him to the earth there? Then I would have given you 10 pieces of silver and a belt." But the man answered Joab, "Though I were to receive 1,000 pieces of silver in my hand, I would not raise my hand against the son of the sovereign, because in our hearing the sovereign commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, saying, Take heed, you who go against the youth, against Absalom. Otherwise I would have been untrue to my own life. No matter is hidden from the sovereign, and you yourself would have set trouble against me. And you have set yourself against me. And Joab said, Let me not waste time here with you. And he took 3 spears in his hand, and thrust them through Absalom's heart, while he was still alive, in the midst of the terebinth tree. And 10 young men who bore Joab's armor went around and struck Absalom and put him to death. And Joab blew with the shofar, and the people returned from pursuing Israel, for Joab had held the people back. But they took Absalom and threw him into a large pit in the forest, and heaped a very large pile of stones over him, and all Israel fled, each one to his tent. And Absalom, in his lifetime, had taken and set up a monument for himself, which is in the sovereign's valley. For he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. And he called the monument after his own name, and to this day it is called Absalom's monument. And Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, said, Please let me run and take the news to the sovereign, for Jehovah has avenged him of his enemies. But Joab said, You are not the man to take the news today, but you shall take the news another day. But today you do not take news, because the sovereign's son is dead. And Joab said to the Cushite, Go inform the sovereign what you have seen. And the Cushite bowed himself to Joab and ran. And Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, said to Joab, And whatever might be, please let me also run after the Cushite. And Joab said, Why would you run, my son? There is no news to bring you reward. And whatever might be, he said, Let me run. So he said to him, Run. And Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain and passed the Cushite. Now David was sitting between the 2 gates. And the watchman went up to the roof over the gate, to the wall, and lifted his eyes and looked and saw a man running alone. So the watchman called out and told the sovereign. And the sovereign said, If he is alone, there is news in his mouth. And he came nearer and nearer. And the watchman saw another man running. And the watchman called out to the gatekeeper and said, See a man running by himself. And the sovereign said, This one is also bringing news. And the watchman said, I see the running of the first is like the running of Ahimaaz, son of Zadok. And the sovereign said, This is a good man, and he comes with good news. And Ahimaaz called out and said to the sovereign, Peace. Then he bowed down his face to the earth before the sovereign and said, Blessed be Jehovah, your Elohim, who has surrendered the men who raised their hand against my master, the sovereign. And the sovereign said, Peace to the young man, to Absalom. And Ahimaaz answered, When Joab sent the sovereign's servant and me, your servant, I saw a crowd, but I did not know why. And the sovereign said, Turn aside and stand here. And he turned aside and stood still. And see, the Cushite came, and the Cushite said, Receive news, my master the sovereign. For Jehovah has avenged you this day, all those who rose against you. And the sovereign said to the Cushite, Peace to the young man, to Absalom. And the Cushite answered, Let the enemies of my master the sovereign, and all who rise against you for evil, be as that young man is. And the sovereign was shaken, and went up to the room over the gate, and wept. And as he went, he said this, O my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. O Absalom, my son, my son. And it was reported to Joab, see, the sovereign is weeping and mourning for Absalom. So the deliverance that day was turned into mourning for all the people, for the people heard on that day, saying, the sovereign has been grieved for his son. And the people stole back into the city that day, as people who are ashamed steal away when they flee in battle. And the sovereign covered his face, and the sovereign cried out with a loud voice, O my son Absalom, O Absalom, my son, my son. And Joab came into the house to the sovereign and said, Today you have put to shame all your servants, who today have saved your life, and the lives of your sons and daughters, and the lives of your wives, and the lives of your concubines, by loving those who hate you, and by hating those who love you. For you have made it clear today that you have neither commanders nor servants. For today I know that if Absalom had lived, and all of us had died today, then it would be right in your eyes. And now, arise and go out and speak to the heart of your servants. For I swear by Jehovah, if you do not go out, not one passes the night with you. And that is worse for you than all the evil that has come upon you from your youth until now. For the sovereign rose up and sat in the gate, and they told all the people, saying, Look, the sovereign is sitting in the gate. And all the people came before the sovereign. As for Israel had fled, each one to his tent. And it came to be that all the people were contending throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, The sovereign delivered us from the hand of the enemies. He rescued us from the hand of the Philistines, and now he has fled from the land because of Absalom. And Absalom, who we anointed over us, has died in battle. And now, why are you silent about bringing back the sovereign? And the sovereign David sent to Zadok and Abiathar the priest, saying, Speak to the elders of Yehudah, saying, Why are you the last to bring the sovereign back to his house, since the words of all Israel have come to the sovereign to his house? You are my brothers, you are my bone and my flesh. Why then are you the last to bring back the sovereign, and say to Amasa, Are you not my bone and my flesh? Elohim do so to me and more also, if you are not commander of the army before me all the days in place of Joab. Thus he swayed the hearts of all the men of Yehudah as one man, so that they sent to the sovereign, saying, Return, you and all your servants. So the sovereign returned and came to the Jordan, and Yehudah came to Gilgal to go to meet the sovereign, to bring the sovereign over the Jordan. And Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjamite, who was from Bahurim, hastened and came down with the men of Yehudah to meet sovereign David. And with him were 1,000 men of Benjamin, and Seba, the servant of the house of Shaul, and his 15 sons and his 20 servants with him, and they rushed over the Jordan before the sovereign. And they passed over the ford to bring over the sovereign's household, and to do what was good in his eyes. And Shimei, son of Gera, fell down before the sovereign when he had passed over the Jordan, and said to the sovereign, Do not let my master reckon crookedness to me, neither remember what wrong your servant did on the day that my master the sovereign left Jerusalem, that the sovereign should take it to heart. For I, your servant, know that I have sinned, and see, I have come today, first of all the house of Joseph, to go down to meet my master the sovereign. But Abishai, son of Zeruiah, answered and said, Should Shimei not be put to death for this, because he cursed the anointed of Jehovah? And David said, What have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? that you are the adversaries to me today. Should any man be put to death in Yisrael today? For do I not know that I am sovereign over Yisrael today? So the sovereign said to Shimei, You do not die. And the sovereign swore to him. And Mephibosheth, son of Shaul, came down to meet the sovereign. And he had not attended to his feet, nor trimmed his mustache, nor washed his garments from the day the sovereign went away until the day he came back in peace. And it came to be, when he had come to Jerusalem to meet the sovereign, that the sovereign said to him, Why do you not go with me, Mephibosheth? And he answered, My master, O sovereign, my servant deceived me. For your servant said, I am saddling a donkey for myself, to ride on it and to go to the sovereign, because your servant is lame. And he spoke slander against your servant to my master the sovereign. But my master the sovereign is as a messenger of Elohim. Therefore, do what is good in your eyes. For all of my father's house were but dead men before my master the sovereign. Yet you set your servant among those who eat at your own table. Therefore, what right have I still to cry out any more to the sovereign? Then the sovereign said to him, Why do you speak any more of your matters? I have said, You and Seba share the land. And Mephibosheth said to the sovereign, Rather let him take it all, since my master the sovereign has come back in peace to his own house. And Barzillai the Gileadite came down from Rogelim, and passed over the Jordan with the sovereign, and sent him on his way over the Jordan. And Barzillai was a very aged man, 80 years old, and he had sustained the sovereign while he was dwelling at Mahanaim, for he was a very rich man. And the sovereign said to Barzillai, Pass over with me, and I shall provide you with me in Jerusalem. But Barzillai said to the sovereign, How many are the days in my life that I should go up with the sovereign to Jerusalem? I am now 80 years old. Do I discern between the good and evil? Does your servant taste what I eat or what I drink? Do I still hear the voice of singing men and singing women? Why then should your servant be a further burden to my master the sovereign? Your servant would only pass over the Jordan, and the sovereign for a short distance. And why should the sovereign repay me with such a reward? Please let your servant turn back again to die in my own city, near the burial site of my father and mother. But here's your servant Kimham. Let him pass over with my master the sovereign, and do for him what is good in your eyes. And the sovereign answered, Kimham is passing over with me, and let me do for him what is good in your eyes. Now whatever you choose of me, I do for you. Then all the people went over the Jordan, and when the sovereign had passed over, the sovereign kissed Barzillai and blessed him, and he returned to his own place. And the sovereign passed over to Gilgal, and Kimham passed over with him. And all the people of Yehudah brought the sovereign over, and also half the people of Israel. And see, all the men of Israel were coming to the sovereign. Why have our brothers, the men of Yehudah, stolen you away and brought the sovereign and his household, and all David's men with him over the Jordan? And all the men of Yehudah answered the men of Israel, Because the sovereign is our relative, and why are you displeased over this matter? Have we at all eaten of the sovereign's cost? Or has he given us any gifts? And the men of Israel answered the men of Yehudah and said, We have 10 parts in the sovereign, and in David too. We have more than you. Why then did you despise us? Was it not our advice first to bring back our sovereign? But the words of the men of Yehudah were harsher than the words of the men of Israel.